This morning finds us in Psalm 35, yet another psalm by King David. Again, reminder, David wrote at least 73 of these psalms, so don't be surprised when his name pops up over and over again. But this morning, we don't know much about the specific circumstances behind David's writing of this psalm. Sometimes the psalms come with what we call titles or the superscription that explains what's going on. This one merely is titled Of David. It's an imprecatory psalm in one sense, David crying out, asking God to punish his enemy, but really it's more of a lament. It's David bemoaning his situation, crying out in heartfelt honesty about the misery, the disappointment, the struggles he's experienced at the hands of his enemy. And so he's calling out, as all laments do, on God to deliver him. That God, for his glory, not for David's, to rescue him and pull him out of the mire, the situation he's in. If that doesn't fit our own present day circumstances right now, I don't know what else will. So let's read Psalm 35 and let's pick a verse here and there and think about what it is David is trying to say to us today. Here's David's prayer. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of the shield and buckler and rise for my help. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. Let them be turned back and disappointed who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. For without cause they hid their net for me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. Let destruction come upon him who does not know it. And let the net that he hid ensnare him. Let him fall into it, to his destruction. Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his salvation. All my bones will say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and the needy from him who robs him? Malicious witnesses rise up. They ask me of things that I do not know. They repay me evil for good. My soul is bereft. But when they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I afflicted myself with fasting. I prayed with a head bowed on my chest. I went about as though I grieved for my friend or my brother, as one who laments his mother. I bowed down in mourning. But at my stumbling they rejoiced and gathered. They gathered together against me. Wretches whom I did not know tore at me without ceasing. Like profane mockers at a feast, they gnash at me with their teeth. How long, O Lord, will you look on? Rescue me from their destruction, my precious life from the lions. I will thank you in the great congregation. In the mighty throng I will praise you. Let not those rejoice over me who are wrongfully my foes, and let not those wink the eye who hate me without cause. For they do not speak peace, but against those who are quiet in the land they devise words of deceit. They open wide their mouths against me. They say, Aha, aha! Our eyes have seen it. You have seen, O Lord, be not silent. O Lord, be not far from me. Awake, rouse yourself for my vindication, for my cause, my God and my Lord. Vindicate me, O Lord my God, according to your righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me. Let them not say in their hearts, Aha, our heart's desire. Let them not say, We have swallowed him up. Let them be put to shame and disappointed altogether who rejoice at my calamity. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor, who magnify themselves against me. Let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad, and say forevermore, Great is the Lord, who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness, and of your praise all day long. And so for some Christians who have this picture of this all-benevolent God, and he is, but they have this idea of a God who's kind of grandfatherly, a God who never has a stern word, a God who never gets angry. Psalms like this, and particularly Psalms of imprecation, I'll get it right, imprecation, really startle us. Here's David in brutal honesty talking about the problems he's facing. How there are those who have risen up against him, some who apparently even he had taken care of in their down days, people he'd loved, people he'd cared for, people he mourned over. And yet now, when he seems to be struggling, they're piling on, hoping for his defeat. In fact, they're working against him behind his back. They're trying to undermine his leadership. And David is crying out to God for deliverance. Not only crying out for deliverance, David is crying out that God would punish them, that their own traps would trap them, that God would bring their plans to naught, God would bring them down. What do we do with all that? Are we supposed to pray these kind of prayers against our enemies, real or perceived? Are we to pursue their fall? Are we to seek vengeance? Of course, we know the answer to that one's a no, that vengeance belongs to the Lord our God. But are we to be secretly hoping for somebody who's been against us to get what they've got coming? Sinful human nature says yes, but what is David doing here when he seems to be doing the same thing? And that's the key to understanding laments, as well as when you do come across the occasional imprecatory prayer in the book of Psalms. You'll notice that these imprecations, these laments that call out for God to defeat the enemy, they always bring it back ultimately to the issue of God's glory and God's reputation being on the line. And so here David in this lament honestly confesses his struggle. He admits his problem, and then he cries out to God to rescue him and promises that when he does, because he knows that God hears prayer, that he'll give God all the praise and glory for it. And so, for lack of the time to go through every verse, this is one of the longer Psalms we've encountered so far. Let's just hit a point here and there along the way to kind of reaffirm what I've just said. He begins with, "Contend, O Lord, those who contend against me. Fight against them. Take up your shield and your buckler and rise up for my help." So he cries out to God to defeat his enemies, knowing that God hears his cries. He prays out that God will pull out a spear and a javelin. "Say to my soul," he says, "give me comfort. I am your salvation." And then follows with a series of "let them" statements, starting in verse 4 all the way down to verse 9 or verse 8. "Let them be put to shame. Let them be turned back. Let them be like chaff. Let their way be dark and slippery. Let their net trap them. Let destruction come on them." David is calling in brutal honesty for God to rescue him by defeating his enemies once and for all. But then here's that promise, that praise, if you will, the guarantee that David will respond in worship. Verse 9, "Then," he says, "my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in my salvation." And so while we struggle, cry out to the Lord. Be honest. Be heartfelt. God already knows what you're thinking and feeling. Tell him. But don't forget that when he rescues, when he answers, we need to praise him. "All my bones will say, O Lord, who is like you, who delivers the poor from the one who's too strong, the poor and the needy from those who rob him." And then he goes back into his own personal circumstance. Malicious witnesses, people lying about him. Perhaps they're even in the hallway of the palace. They repay evil for good. He's done good to them. They pay him back. He's heartbroken. His soul is bereft. He says, "When they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I cared for them. But at my stumbling, when I struggled, they rejoiced and they gathered." They piled on when things got bad. And David asks, in many ways, just like Job once did, "How long, O Lord, will you look on? Rescue me." He knows God can. "Rescue me from their destruction, my precious life from the lions." Then what's the promise? What's the outcome? Verse 18, "I will thank you in the great congregation. In the mighty throng I'll praise you." Again, worship. Public. David's confession before the people about God's goodness. Back to the prayer. "Let not those rejoice over me, those who wrongfully pursue me. They do not seek peace. They open wide their mouths." Verse 22, "O Lord, you've seen it. Don't be silent. Don't be far from me." So again, David crying out for God to respond in prayer. "Awake, arouse yourself for my vindication, for my cause. Vindicate me." Now we got multiple pleas for God to intervene upon his behalf. Don't let them say in their hearts, "Aha," our heart's desire. Let them not say, "Ha, we've swallowed him up." Let them be put to shame. Let them be disappointed altogether. Let them be clothed with shame and dishonor. "Let those who delight in my righteousness," verse 27, those who are with David, those who are on David's side, "let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad. And say forevermore, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servants." So again, praise, worship. When the God does this, when God answers, when God rescues him from it all, Psalm 35 verse 28 ends with this: "Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all day long." And so yet again, multiple times through the psalm, David admits his need. He pleads his case. He cries out, knowing, not hoping, knowing that God hears his cry, and knowing that when God does, God is worthy of our worship and our praise. And so let me remind you, whatever your circumstances are this week, that God is aware, but you need to confess. You need to admit your need. You need to plead your case. You need to throw yourself upon the mercy of the Lord. And then when he answers, you need to give him all the praise and glory for it. Don't do as we so often do, cry out in our need and then forget when things are good. Let's cry out in our hour of need, in our moment of concern, and then let's remember that God is to be worthy of our praise always, in the good times and the bad. But let's remember that when he does rescue us, that we share our testimony of God's faithfulness with others, because you never know, even now, what you might be going through might be what somebody else will go through, and what God has done for you in your moment of need might be the thing that they need to encourage them as they go through theirs. Let's cry out to God, and then let's sing his praises.